Hi, I'm Drew Crandall. Joining me today is Marsha Gliha, an artist who lives in Vernon, Connecticut and has a fascinating story to share. Marsha, where were you born and raised?
Thank you for having me, first of all. I was born in Bremerton, Washington State.
And how long did you live on the West Coast before you came back to, or came to the East Coast?
It was a very short stay. I think I was perhaps 2.5 or 3 years old when my family decided to return to the East Coast, and we settled in Pennsylvania for a short time.
And where did your interest in art come from, and how old were you?
Well, this is a little bit of a strange story. I can accredit it to divine inspiration. I was perhaps 8, 9 years old, and I was an avid reader even at that time. And I had an obsession and a very strong interest in French Impressionism during the 1900s, I would say, during that period. I studied about many different artists, and I also copied some of their tableaus, their canvases, after which I decided to write a dossier or paper on how they lived, and particularly interested in how they died. So that's how it all started.
What is French Impressionist art?
French Impressionism was actually the first movement that came before modern art, and it involved very spontaneous brush strokes with the interest on the experience and the feeling of what you're looking at. It also depicts light and color of objects and how they appear and shift during various parts of the day. So it was kind of a very rebellious period that had started.
And why do you think you were attracted to French art? You don't necessarily have a French background, do you?
No, I was brought up in a very different ethnic background. But again, it goes back to something really unexplainable, and I call it divine inspiration. Why, I don't know. My father's family was actually trained for the most part as classical musicians. And I was as well for about 9 years, but I had a strong inclination with the French art. I think freedom of objects and the idea of color and how light varies and defines different objects, but the color particularly was very expressive to me. Also, with the French Impressionism, there was a tendency not to look at the accuracy of objects, but more of a blurred sensation of how it made you feel. What was your impression when you looked at a particular landscape or scenery or portrait? It can go in any one of these directions, but it was the obscurity of the object, more of the impression.
Okay, so it's a feeling.
It's a feeling, emotional feeling.
Right, and the French are known as being sort of, feeling-oriented,
Yes, extremely.
as a culture,
yes.
Very romantic and very expressive compared to perhaps other European cultures.
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Now, I understand there was a woman named Myrtle Carlson who played a role in your development as an artist. Would you consider her a mentor?
Yes, I would. As I already expressed, I started doing sketches and drawings at a very early age of the famous artists that had passed. However, Myrtle, I studied. I think it was 2 or 3. It was about 3 years. I would spend the summer with her, and she was an artist located in Bolton, Connecticut, and a superb artist. Spent a lot of time in Rockport, Mass, and she gave me my foundation. The basic foundation is almost comparing it to music. If you were being trained in classical music, it would be the same thing, where you're getting all the classics of your art.
And during this season in your life, am I correct, you were living in Manchester?
Yes, because I was, at that time, I'd say probably 15, 16 years old. So it was really the beginning of my serious taking our art to another level.
So did you graduate from high school in Manchester?
Yes, I did, yes.
And what was your education post-high school?
That varied. I had a really varied background from aesthetics to skincare as a makeup artist, so on and so forth. But in art, I had attended a fashion design school, FIT in New York, also the American Fashion College in Switzerland. So I had really a very eclectic background, and mostly in the fashion field. But also studying art history, for example, in Vernon Court College. They were associated with Rhode Island School of Design. And they had a fabulous art department.
What was that experience like in Newport? I know, are people watching this video, if you're from New England, you know about Newport. It was actually in one of those larger historic homes, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was actually quite a long time ago. And the department that I studied with was the art department. And as I said, it was associated with Rhode Island School of Design. And my classes were really superb. I had a lot of, sketching and basic, really solid art courses.
So from there, I understand you came across the Great Pond to Europe.
Yes, I did. Actually, it was more or less a family type of a vacation. But then from there, I attended the American Fashion College in Switzerland, which had, again, art courses, art history, but it was, I would say, for the most part, it was in a fashion design feeling. So that's what we went to Paris. I had viewed different boutiques within Paris with the great designers Chanel, YSL, Balmain, and it gave me a very strong feeling in design, and also French culture and European language and so forth.
So your family went to Europe as a vacation, but
Yes.
for you, you fell in love with it and you actually stayed there for a period of time, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I would say perhaps 3.5 years, maybe a little bit longer. And after that point in time, it was maybe a 10-year lapse, and I was starting to go to France myself, and I would say it was almost a yearly visits.
So did you learn French to live in France?
I had, again, I can relate it to how my inspiration for French art had began. I had an interest in language. I grew up hearing Russian and other Slavic languages, but I had a distinct interest in France, so therefore it brought me with the French language and the French culture.
What was it like living in France compared to living in the United States? And what was it like for you as a U.S. citizen living in Paris?
Interesting question. I found it for myself, it was a very easy transformation. I felt very, very free in France as far as what's acceptable, everyday life, culture. I was exposed to different types of food. Also, their particular thinking on life in general. I found it extremely easy, very, very comfortable. And I would say perhaps within 3 months, I was starting to have conversational French. I mean, absolutely, I had, errors and mistakes and so forth, but I did start around 3 months. I immersed myself in the culture.
And how were you influenced by Monet? And that's a common name. Even people who aren't into art recognize that name.
Yes.
So some might say that he is arguably the most famous French painter of all time. What's your opinion on Monet, and how did he influence you?
Well, I say that's up for, debate. He was certainly one of the most powerful. I had the great fortune to visit his house in Giverny, and that was an unbelievable experience. I would say his effect on my life as far as my art, especially after being in Giverny, was that the effect of light. I was really, really amazed. I always heard this, but until I actually was physically there, found that the lighting within Giverny was unbelievable. It had such a luminescence that I didn't find in other locations, even in Paris, amazingly so.
Interesting. So how did you end up back in the USA?
Oh, I think, after a certain amount of years, I had visited Morocco. I spent a wonderful, several years in France. I decided that it was time for me to re-enter. No, not a specific reason, but I just found that I needed to come home again. I missed my family and so forth.
Here in New England, we love our roots.
Yes.
And I know I lived in Chicago for a number of years, and I went through a similar process where I just had to return to my homeland, to my roots.
Yes.
So have you spent the rest of your life here in the Manchester area?
No, generally speaking, yes. But every year, I would say, I waited for approximately 10 years. And then after that point, I would take yearly trips to France, and sometimes twice a year. There was something that country held for me great inspiration for my life, for the arts, for the senses, the visual senses. It inspired me, and it would also give me a recharge with my painting. So it's something that I needed to do for myself, and also in the fashion design realm and the fashion industry. I have many friends there that are boutique owners and so forth. So that was extremely stimulating for me, very stimulating.
Is France still a sort of a hot spot for fashion and design?
In my estimation, yes. I'm sure Italy is quite famous too, and it has many incredible things to offer. But because I spent so much time in France, it's very convenient and comfortable for me, particularly with the friends that I have there and the associations I've made. It's become extremely important for me.
What other countries have you visited?
Oh, in my lifetime, I had such a wonderful chance to visit Italy with my family. I was in Greece, which I really adored. Also, as I said, Switzerland. And then I was in Morocco for a short period of time and found that to be extremely exciting and very interesting.
It sounds like France, however, is your favorite.
Yes, it held my heart. It still does. And, hopefully in the future I will continue to go back and forth after this ordeal that we're going through. It is a very important country for me in many, many ways, yes.
And of course, when you study American history, France has been interwoven with our country's history in a very significant way.
Absolutely.
We may not realize the influence and impact that France has had. It may be a little more subliminal than the British roots or some others, but it's definitely there. The footprint, the fingerprint of France is very much here.
Yes, it is. Also, you have to take into account the language, the French language, as our culture is, as English is, but France is also a country of legality. So a lot of the legal terms and so forth is written in French and English. So that's a very interesting point as well.
I'm curious, a little sidebar. Have you ever been to Quebec, the French Quarter?
I was in Montreal, I was in Quebec, but that was a little while ago. Unfortunately, not as often as I'd like to go, but I enjoyed both places. Well, particularly Montreal because it was more of a city, and I gravitate towards cities, so I enjoyed both very much.
My wife comes from a French-Canadian family, and again, with New England history, there was a huge migration of French Canadians to the United States in the 1800s with the factories and the mills, and they came here largely for jobs and opportunity, and there's a very strong relationship there. I understand that over the years you have painted a multitude of paintings, many of which are in our studio. We are going to go through them
Yes, I'm excited.
one by one. I'm curious, what kinds of images do you gravitate toward? We have one right here. And what is this of, for example?
Well, this is the title for this piece is called Paris Revisited. And it is in the Latin Quarter. It's one of the areas that I frequent and I'm particularly very fond of. The Sorbonne, actually, the Sorbonne would be on the next street, very, very close, directly across, and it's a absolutely beautiful area. Universities, you have a lot of ethnic restaurants. It's become a very chic area, actually, in Paris, the Latin Quarter. And this was a particular, on this side, was a hotel that had been there for many, many decades, which very often when I visited Paris, I would stay here. And it's kind of interesting because after I painted this, I think it was a year after, as you can see, the balcony, the balcon here it's very old and it almost looks like it's collapsing. And as a matter of fact, they did tear it down and they rebuilt it into a beautiful hotel. But and it's interesting that I did get to capture it before they destroyed it. So interesting area.
The colors in this painting are very vibrant. In
Yes.
these studio lights, I can see quite the interesting texture.
Well, thank you so much. And similar to the French Impressionists, as they were, I also paint in plein air or outside. You can capture the lighting and the intensity of the atmosphere and in the outside. So I prefer painting outside when possible. And I also use Charvin oils, which are made in France, and they're blended with or hand rolled with poppy seed oil instead of a linseed oil. So therefore, it's going to create a vibrant color, and the color duration is going to be that much longer than with linseed. So I've painted with both as mediums, but I do honestly prefer Charvin. I love them.
So would you have painted this actually at the balcony with a tripod and your canvas? Or would you have painted this from a photo outside on a tripod? How would that process have worked? Would we have been walking through the streets of and seen you with your tripod and your little maybe a hat on?
No, I wish that was the case. If I had been living there, I would say most probably it would be yes. But under the circumstances of vacations and so forth, what I did was the photography. So I would take photos, and then from there I'd work them up.
Okay. So how many paintings have you painted, would you guess, in your whole journey?
So again, I had a full-time career for most of my life, so that put a little bit of a pressure on me. So I would say since in the last 4 years or so, right now I'm probably up to 30.
Okay. Now there is a common stereotype about the starving artist. How did you make a living all those years? How do you make a living? And is it possible to be an artist, a painter, and actually make a living where you can do it virtually full time?
Very good question. Well, as I believe I perhaps stated in the beginning, I had a profession, a full-time career as an esthetician, makeup artist. I worked for very large French houses, French companies, most of my life. So therefore, I had a full-time position. However, my passion, as I stated from a very young person, was painting, oil painting in particular. And once I had the opportunity to have a little bit more time, I'm putting all my passion and focus into that.
So this is basically your full-time endeavor right now.
Exactly.
At this season in your life.
Exactly.
The time has come.
Very well said, yes. This is the season.
And I understand you were, forgive me if I don't have the right term, but you were into cosmetics.
Yes.
And helping particularly women to look beautiful. So in a way, a woman's face was a canvas that you helped to paint for many years.
Exactly. It's really interesting when in hindsight, when I think back on it, but it was almost like painting every day in a
Right.
certain way. But with the technology of skincare, which was enormous in what I did, because I worked with some very, very high-tech lines and very professional lines. So it was a blend of technology with art.
Would you say that with the advent of the coronavirus, that has actually given you more focus on painting because of, sheltering at home and you can't travel to Paris and maybe you have a little cabin fever stuck in the home, so that's you've been able to the creative juices have been able to flow even more during these crazy times?
I would say definitely so, 100%. I always liked my solitude. I always enjoyed staying in with myself and painting and reading and so forth. So I would say it enhanced my life in a certain way, and especially in an artistic way, yes.
And I understand that your home in Vernon, you've actually turned that home into a canvas.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
It's probably a little more colorful and creative and unique than your typical home.
Yes, it's really an expression of myself, my feelings, my emotions, which were always very, very important to me, and it's expressed in my living accommodation, my home, and how I chose to decorate, and the colors that I chose to live with that were comfortable for me.
And even your wardrobe is a canvas that you paint
Yes,
on through
yes.
the clothing you choose and the accessories that you choose.
Absolutely so. And
You're just an artistic woman
yes, I am.
from head to toe.
Always have been from a very early age. I never really thought about it, but yes, I always used myself as a canvas, and I felt if I was happy with what I was wearing, that's all that mattered. So color played an important role.
Sure. Now, what role does technology play? Some people, for example, these days are really into IT and technology.
Yes.
We all have
they
friends who
yes.
are techies.
Yes.
Has painting and Impressionist painting gone technology crazy, or is it still like the old days where you do it with the old-fashioned brush on an old-fashioned canvas and it's done old school?
Well, I can only speak for myself. And I was trained in a traditional way, traditional classic art background in oils. So I've remained that way, I've remained true to my passion. However, there is a place for technology, and I'm beginning to believe that more and more. And I think that because of technology, I'm here today.
Right.
I think if there wasn't technology, I absolutely would not be here. So, but as far as how I work and what I choose to, the medium I choose to work in, it's quite traditional. Although I've experienced other people, particularly I have one of my hairdresser in France, after she would do complete my haircut or whatever service she was performing, she turned them into technological drawings and paintings of some sort. I don't know how she did it, but it was quite amazing.
Because there is amazing software out
Yes,
there now.
it was amazing what she
Right.
produced, and I was quite thrilled and excited.
Right.
Yeah.
But your journey has been
No,
100%
mine
the
is-
traditionalist route,
Exactly so.
even if some of your art may be digitized
Yes,
and enter cyberspace.
exactly so.
So getting back to this painting we have here, how many hours would you think it took for you from start to finish to paint this?
Oh, I would say in this last collection that I've done, they would go anywhere from 2 to 3 months. Yes, and I would do on one session perhaps 5 to 6 hours.
Do you focus on one painting at a time, or are you painting multiple paintings where you have
No.
multiple tripods and you sort of, well, if today I think I'll work on this one.
No,
Tomorrow I think I'll work on this one.
No, I always stay with one. I'm very focused. And actually, it's interesting. Before I do my sketches and my photography, of course, beforehand. But before I even start the painting, I visually see it finished in my head.
Sure.
Which can be sometimes difficult because I want to get to a point that I have to start from the beginning, and that's sometimes difficult. I get impatient.
Are you a perfectionist?
Yes, I would say.
And
absolutely.
so when do you reach the point where you look at a painting and say, I could do more, I could do this, I could do that, but enough is enough. It's fini.
Very good question. Again, I think that with each painting, I will go back and forth towards the end of the painting. However, there comes a point when I look at it and I know I feel in my heart and soul that this is it, it's done, and not to put another brush stroke. It's just, again, I go by intuition, emotion, and how I feel about it.
Right. So what kind of legacy would you like to leave behind with your art? Where do you see the future? Number one, what do you hope happens to your creations?
Okay.
And then number two, when the Lord calls you home, oftentimes it seems sadly that people's creations, they spend a lifetime accumulating and creating these pieces of art, and then when they die, people come in and throw them in a box and they
dreadful.
disappear. Right.
Yes.
So what's your end game on this?
Well, I have several different thoughts on that point. When I created this collection, I had that in my mind because of the season of time and so forth. I would like to be able to exhibit, to have a source where I can actually lend them to someone, a designated person before that time arrives, so that they would be received in a gracious way, and also with the emotion and feeling and time that I put into them, they would be appreciated and it would be reciprocal.
In our culture today, oftentimes people moan about how certain topics in our culture are becoming passé. Like our young people don't know American history, or they don't know world history, or they're so involved in their devices and this and that. So I'm curious, in your journey, have you noticed a decrease in general public awareness of an interest in art and Impressionist art and painting? Or do you think people are coming back to it? Or what do you see in terms of sort of a cultural trend for people's interest and appreciation for what you do?
Thank you for that question. I think that if you asked me that question a few years ago, it would perhaps be a little bit more negative or not so encouraging. But strangely enough, I think because of the pandemic, it's kind of a complicated question just to answer in this interview.
Right.
But I think that the appreciation for art, and not just friendship, but for art in general, in the next year, 5 years, is going to really increase. And I think that it's given the opportunity for many, many different artists to really receive recognition. And I think there's just a deeper appreciation that's going to come from people's efforts, and that they've put their heart and soul into whatever work they're doing.
That's interesting that you should say that, because the pendulum does swing. And as we've gone through the coronavirus, here in Connecticut, the residential real estate market, the pendulum has swung in an enormous way, where up until a year ago, everybody was saying the millennials don't want the suburban lifestyle. They want to live in densely populated urban areas to enjoy the city experience. Well, after being sheltering at home, cooped up in a little apartment in the big city for months at a time, they want some space. They want some land to play on. And so we have seen here in Connecticut, it's happened in Boston and other cities, where people are actually migrating away from the densely populated urban areas to the suburbs, to the country. And so it's encouraging, if I'm listening right, that you see a similar kind of pendulum swing
Oh, yes,
with appreciation for art.
Definitely so. And I think there's many, many different considerations to take into, into place here. And I definitely feel that the pendulum has swung with the arts and artistic endeavors, and that they'll be much highly appreciated in the near future.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question. If you were to encourage and coach other painters,
Yes.
perhaps younger people who were where you were a number of years ago, what would you say and what advice would you give them?
The only advice I can truthfully give is what I've experienced myself. So I would say definitely be true to yourself, what you feel. The only way I feel you can produce anything of value in art or in painting is to express what you have in your soul, what you have in your heart, what you feel is an emotional response. And that's what you have to try to calculate and be able to transport into something visual. And that's what's going to make you unique and successful in your own domain. And yes, absolutely.
Great. Well, if someone wanted to contact you, what's the best way to reach you and perhaps learn more about your art?
Well, I do have a website. It's www.MGlihaArtistinOils.com.
And I believe that's on the screen.
Yes.
Could you repeat that, please?
Okay, it's www.MGlihaArtistinOils.com.
Well, Marsha, this has been a treat, so
Yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we hope that somehow you have been encouraged and inspired by what you've seen. We're also going to now tape different interviews about each piece of art that she has here in our studio. So you're welcome to check those out as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.